Welcome, everybody, to today's Community Technical Assistance Center of New York, CTAC's webinar on Reimagining Children's Services Part 3. We deeply apologize for the delay, as we've been having a number of technical difficulties, but I think we finally got it shored up thanks to the support of our staff and the WebEx system. So again, apologies for the delay, but I think we can just go ahead and get started. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background on sort of the housekeeping, if it's the first time you happen to be on the webinar. And then I will pass it off to Dr. Mary McKay, the Director of the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York, to introduce our lovely presenter, Angela Keller from New York State Office of Mental Health. So if this is the first time that you're on a webinar for us, I just wanted to clarify that everybody is currently muted, and you'll remain muted through the duration of the webinar. This is a webinar that's going to go on until about 1:30. If you have any questions, please use the chat box. The chat box is on the right-hand side. And make sure that you click on the drop-down, send to all panelists. That way, us as the presenters can see your comments and your questions. There will be a couple of times throughout the webinar where we're going to ask you some questions specifically. And so if any participation in that, as well as a poll question that we'll also do later on, would be really wonderful. If you're having technical issues on your end, please send a message via chat to the host in the chat box on the right-hand side, or you can email brianna.concalves@nyu.edu. And just I know a number of you probably have questions around accessing the webinar recording and slides later. All the materials for this webinar, as well as the previous 2 webinars in the series, are available on ctacny.com. Today's webinar recording will be up within the next day or so, because it takes a minute to get that posted. So I just also wanted to clarify that Angela Keller will be able to answer some of your questions around understanding the new menu of services. But that what we want you to understand is that there's a few answers that are the answers that Angela provides during the webinar will be reviewed and put together and posted on the website. A final response to the different questions that you asked will be posted on the ctacny.com website after the webinar. So if you have additional questions or you have some questions that didn't get answered during the webinar, you'll be able to go to our website and look at the frequently asked question list as well. So thank you, everybody, for your patience. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Mary McKay, the Director of CTAC, who will tell you a little bit about our webinar today and introduce our presenter. Mary?
Thank you, Lydia. And welcome, everyone, to the webinar. Thanks for your patience as we work through any technological difficulties. And so I am just thrilled to introduce our presenter today. This webinar is the 3rd in a series that we have specifically focused on the transforming children's mental health service system and to really try to help provider organizations anticipate ways that they need to plan and think about delivery of services to children and their families across the state. We are delighted to have hundreds of people having listened in from children's mental health clinics, but also from all other sectors of children's services, from family support services to residential treatment to day treatment to home and community-based waiver services. We've been really, really pleased to have a number of other provider organizations and family support organizations really listening in, trying to take in the information that our New York State colleagues are providing. So with that, let me introduce you to Angela Keller. She is going to talk us through an evolving, a draft version, but what she considers in real time the menu of children's services that we can start to wrap our minds around how we could provide quality care to kids and their families. I really appreciate Angela for a couple of reasons, just both personally and professionally. First, that you've been willing to really be out in front and giving those of us that care about kids and families in the state, real-time information about how the menu of services is evolving, the draft benefit packages, and I really appreciate your hard work on behalf of kids and families. So with that, I think we're going to have a lot of important questions for you, some of which you'll be able to answer, some of which you'll take under advisement, and we so appreciate you giving us an overview of the new menu of services. So with that, Angela, thanks so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mary. I feel like as we've introduced each of these webinars, that there should be some theme music playing in the background. So as we're saying, Reimagining Children's Mental Health Services, Part 3, the saga continues. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk about the exciting developments in children's mental health services and also just in general, children's service delivery for the state of New York. While OMH has presented the previous 2 CTAC webinars, and I represent OMH, all the information related to the children's managed care design really reflects a strong collaboration across 4 state agencies on behalf of all children. And those agencies are the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, the Office of Mental Health, the Office of Children and Family Services, and the Department of Health. Next slide. So let's get started. Today, during the 3rd webinar of this series, we'll review the aim of the redesign, talk about the new menu of services, envision how we can provide the services and how providers can be ready, discuss some recommended steps for preparation, and hopefully have some time for Q&A. You heard Donna Bradbury in Part 1, if you listened to the first webinar, cite the sobering statistics about children with mental health issues and what happens for them when they do not get appropriate services early. The goal of the design is to identify needs early, maintain children at home with supports and services, and in the least restrictive setting in the community. And we really want to prevent longer-term need for higher-end services. If you take a look at the image on this slide, let's remember that Superman is commonly seen as a brave and kind-hearted hero with a strong sense of justice, morality, and righteousness. He adheres to an unwavering moral code instilled in him by his adoptive parents. Don't we all want to see children be powerful in their own right, able to be faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leave tall buildings in a single bound? Of course we do. Next slide. We are getting a chat question that some people can't see the screen, Lydia. But I'll keep going. The aim of the redesign, we want to improve quality through early identification and intervention, accountability for outcomes, integrated approaches, enhancing service delivery and continuum of care so that all children can have equal access to needed services. So what does improving quality mean specifically? Next slide. Tony Salerno reviewed the slide in Part 2 of the webinar series, and in order to change the results, we must change the system. So what needs to change in your organization with regard to these dimensions of quality, so safety, effectiveness, timeliness, efficiency, etc.? It means you need to be aware of how your agency and services align with the transformation ahead of us. Next slide. So let's get more specific on where we're going with the children's managed care design. The target populations that are assumed part of this transition to managed care include those listed on the slides. So it's all children under the age of 21, children with serious emotional disturbance, children in the foster care system, children who are physically disabled and require medical or technological health supports, and youth with substance use disorders. These represent all the children that are the responsibility of the 4 partnership agencies. Next slide. Our overall focus has been to ensure that children and their families receive the right services at the right time in the right amounts. Next slide. The focus is on bolstering lower level of services to prevent the need for more restrictive settings. Home and community-based services are really key to this. For example, before elevating to needing day treatment, which is at the top of this pyramid, we want to surround the child with a blend of clinic and home and community-based services, which are more represented on the bottom 3 levels of this pyramid. While the continuum appears linear, we expect that each child's journey is unique and most often does not take a linear path. Next slide. So where are we today with respect to managed care? Some services are already in managed care today, which are represented on this slide. Providers that deliver these types of services already interface daily with managed care plans, and many more of you who don't deliver these 3 types of services will in the future interface with managed care plans. Next slide. In 2016, we expect that additional Medicaid services will transition into managed care. These are currently billed and paid on a fee-for-service basis and are carved out of managed care. So day treatment, community residences, residential treatment facilities, all the home and community-based services under the 1915C waivers, and foster care per diem payments. Next slide. One of the themes developed by the Children's MRT Behavioral Health Subcommittee included a desire to improve the children's service system. We know that today many opportunities are missed early in a child's trajectory of changes that could really prevent a costly path for that child and their family's future. A child and their family in many cases must fail through a variety of programs, services, and interventions before being determined eligible, say, for an HCBS waiver. By that time, the child and family have likely developed a more complex array of challenges that addressed earlier may not have even occurred. The Children's Design Team, again made up of the 4 state agencies, thought about several aspects of our current systems and populations served, including overlaps of needs across systems for children and families, and continued gaps in services across our systems. The shortcomings of our current systems, combined with the desire to intervene early, led to a decision to develop this new set of state plan Medicaid services listed on the slide. It will enable us to focus upon prevention and wellness and a better integration of behavioral health services in children's early care. The proposed services will be under the state plan within the early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment benefits, which are commonly called by their abbreviation EPSDT. EPSDT is an array of Medicaid benefits for children and primarily focus around preventive medical care, well baby visits, vaccinations, screenings at particular ages, and the plans then report to the state on the degree to which they are providing those early services to children throughout their birth to 21. The 6 new services will be available for all children on Medicaid under the age of 21, and the array of services will allow the delivery to be in natural settings where children live. We know through research that the modal number of visits that children receive from mental health clinic services is just 1. Delivery of services in an office-based clinical setting is not providing enough opportunity to intervene early enough for most children. Additionally, the proposed SPA services provides New York State with an avenue to incentivize the delivery of evidence-based practices that we know, when they're delivered well, can result in better outcomes for children and families. And I'll talk a little bit about where the evidence-based practices fit into this array in a moment. But first, let's break apart the 6 services in a little bit more detail. So the first service is crisis intervention. We'll require a 24/7 availability with a 1-hour response time upon receiving a call from the community. It's a team-based service that's intended to interrupt a crisis and includes, with the actual response, an assessment of what's going on, de-escalation, development of a safety plan, and then additional referral and follow-up to supports that the family might need. There are many models across the state where localities have some availability of mobile crisis capacity. Some of you also know these services that are titled crisis response or immediate crisis response within the OMH or OCFS waivers. Our intent is that the service will be readily available and come to the child and family where the crisis is occurring, including in school settings if that is needed. By placing this under the authority of the state plan, it also enables us the opportunity for parity within the commercial health insurance plans, giving this service an additional revenue stream once the service is operational in communities. Next slide. Family peer and youth peer services are defined in the proposed definition, should be familiar to most of you who have come in contact with a family support service or maybe youth peer support in different parts of the state. The services will be more readily available to all children with Medicaid to provide peer-led services and supports that work in tandem with any clinical or therapeutic services that our family and a child might be receiving. Again, remember that the state plan services are universally available to all children on Medicaid. Our next service, Community Psychiatric Supports and Treatment, or CPST, is really an umbrella service that will encompass a variety of activities for children and families in the community. Many of you familiar with the current OMH and OCFS waivers would understand that CPST activities include those now covered under intensive in-home services or crisis avoidance management and training, for example. CPST activities could include identifying strategies or treatment options associated with the children's behavioral health needs, individual supportive treatment and counseling, solution-focused interventions, harm reduction, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral management and problem behavior analysis, life safety skills development, facilitating participation and utilization of strength-based planning, assistance with employment, housing, and education goals, and support to connect with additional services. It could also be assisting the child and family with effectively responding to or avoiding triggers that would risk their remaining in a community location. This service also could encompass the provision of short-term intervention for families immediately upon a crisis. And probably most importantly, it enables us to implement interventions using an evidence-based practice. So right now across New York State, there might be providers in different communities that have either received grants or done fundraising and have decided that their agency would like to implement an evidence-based practice, such as MST, MFT, FFT, some of those abbreviations that people, I'm sure, have commonly heard. And then when the cycle of the grant runs out, it's often difficult for those providers to stay in fidelity to those models in which they've been certified and trained. And what the CPST reimbursement and ability to have this in Medicaid enables some of those evidence-based practices to stay alive for much longer than they have been traditionally, and to be offered more widely across the state. Our next service that we're proposing in the state plan is Psychosocial Rehabilitation Services. This is really implementing interventions outlined on the treatment plan to compensate for or eliminate a functional deficit and interpersonal and/or environmental barriers. Interventions that restore social and interpersonal skills, support identification and pursuit of personal interests, and improve self-management, to name just a few. Next slide. Other licensed practitioner, or OLP, is intended to provide a vehicle to reimburse the cited licensed professionals to be able to engage with and provide services to children out in the community consistent with their licensed scope of practice. These professionals may have no or limited ability within the Medicaid system today for reimbursement. Let's take an example of a two-person team that's delivering an evidence-based practice in the community that focuses on assisting the child and family to gain skills so they're better able to recognize triggers to crises, know how to respond, and prevent those from occurring in the future. The non-licensed professional that is required as a part of that fidelity model would bill for the activities that they deliver under CPST, and the licensed practitioner would bill through the OLP service. Both team members would have distinct roles in the intervention and certainly as defined within whichever evidence-based practice that they are following and delivering. Next slide. So to encourage people, so we don't forget our questions, we want to just stop for a moment and please in the chat box for the panelists, do you have any questions about these 6 proposed new state plan services? We'll address them towards the end of the webinar, unless I see one on the screen that really we can quickly answer at this point.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm not sure if there's a little bit of an echo when I'm talking, but there's if you can use the chat box, there seems to be a chat box and a Q&A box. If we can keep your comments in the chat box, that would be preferred. That way we can kind of keep track of everybody's questions. And if you can just submit them now. And there's a couple questions, Angela. Right now there's only 2 that have kind of come in, and you can decide if you want to answer those now or table them for a little bit later. One is, what is the certifications peers will need?
We'll define that in a service manual that will be developed at a later date. We have existing models within New York for both family peers and for youth peers. Some of that's also in development. And once we get to that point, everybody will be aware of what those certification requirements are. We're really attempting to build it upon existing systems and existing processes we have in the state, particularly around the issue of certification. And the other question was, both licensed and unlicensed providers can bill for their time delivering the same service. Let me be clear, when the team would go out to deliver a service within the context of an evidence-based practice, their focus as a licensed or as a non-licensed provider are really different as part of that intervention with the family. So they're not delivering the same service. They may be delivering those activities under one single model, but what they're actually doing with the families, maybe one person is in the dining room meeting with the parent and in the living room meeting with the child, but they're there at the same time, and then may, towards the end of that visit or that service delivery, join together and share whatever they've been working on.
Thank you, Angela. There's a question that came in. Is this B2H services under another name?
Say the question again.
Is this B2H services under another name?
Some of those. Let me keep going. I think that'll answer some of the questions that we're starting to get at this point.
Great, thank you.
So on the next slide are the proposed home and community-based services array. Unlike the proposed state plan services that will be universally available to all children on Medicaid, this proposed array of HCBS services will be available to children eligible for Medicaid who meet specific target population and functional limitations criteria. I'll talk a little bit about the criteria in a moment. Some of it will be familiar to some of you, and some of it is some new categories. The HCBS array was developed by aligning all the services offered to children enrolled in 6 1915C waivers. So it's the OMH SED waiver, the OCFS B2H waivers, and the DOH's Care at Home waiver 1 and 2. These are services that we know, based on the histories of those waivers, that already produce good outcomes, keep children out of long-term institutional care, and provide the support that families need to recover and become more resilient. The services are only offered currently within the waivers, and it really limits that access to those that are eligible for the waiver programs, and we're limited by the number of slots available across the state. In keeping with our desire for a broader array of services to be available to children and families, that's why we developed this more comprehensive list of benefits for children who meet the functional and target criteria, which I'll talk a little bit about. The next slide hopefully will answer the question that we just got, is this B2H with a different name? Somewhat, but I just want to reemphasize that really this list of 13 HCBS services was derived from existing 1915C waivers. So we've aligned those services across the waivers for one array. So the actual service definitions, some of the qualifications for who can deliver it, what we've tried to do is if there were differences, say, between the OMH and OCFS waiver on a service that was called the same thing, we've tried to come together with one single definition and the qualifications being in common, having only one set. One thing I do want to point out is the family and youth peer support and crisis response services that exist in the current waivers don't exist on this list, because remember, we're proposing those to be in the state plan for more universal access. So if you were to compare this list on the screen to what's available in the OMH waiver, the OCFS waiver, there would be some that are missing. As I've stated, this alignment really reflects the coordination across systems to meet the multi-system needs of children. And the alignment was a clear task in making all those services available for children, whether their primary service system was mental health, substance abuse, health, or foster care. Next slide. So again, we want to give you a chance to ask some questions so you don't forget them on what is proposed, the proposed HCBS service array.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, please make sure you're using the chat box. It says chat on the right-hand side to submit your questions. For some reason you don't see that chat box, you should have a little icon at the top that says chat with a bubble. You can click on that if for some reason it's not popping up in your panel, and that'll pop it up. So, and then make sure when you submit your question or comment, click send to all panelists in the drop-down. So it looks like we have a question coming in, Angela. If you have a second to answer, how would a youth not be eligible for a health home but would be eligible for HCBS array of services?
Well, it's possible that a child would be eligible for health home. They meet the chronic conditions. It would be appropriate for them to need care coordination. But they don't rise to the level of having functional limitations that you would need to demonstrate to become eligible for the HCBS services. We're going to talk about that criteria in a minute. The other question is, do all the services require face-to-face, or will electronic communication count in these billing categories? We haven't settled on that entirely, but we do anticipate that, for example, with the crisis intervention service, that there is going to be some contact that occurs by phone, and the expectation that through triaging or even the referral and follow-up stage from crisis intervention, that the rate will include some of those administrative tasks that is not, say, direct face-to-face contact. For the family peer support services, another example comes to mind is that in our definition right now, we are proposing that there be an ability for some sort of, for other alternative electronic means to deliver services. So, for example, through Skype. All of these things have not yet been submitted to CMS, so whether CMS will agree to that, you know, is a question down the line, but that is at least part of a couple examples that I can think of off the top of my head. Okay.
So one question is, where does CPSC and OLP fall within the array table? So it seems to be a question around the differences between those two sets of services you just talked about.
So the table really demonstrates how we aligned the HCBS services to come up with an array of 13 services. Anything that fell out that are in the current waiver models are sitting now or in our proposed state plan services. So CPST is really, as I said, an umbrella of activities and encompasses a few of the services that are incorporated in the waivers today. So intensive in-home in OMH's waiver would now be a component of CPST. Other licensed practitioner is a mechanism to reimburse licensed practitioners for delivering services within their scope of practice. So why don't we keep going?
Okay.
Because we've asked a number of...
Angela, I just want to let everybody know that you can keep submitting your questions and comments via the chat box, and we'll also be able to have a Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. On the next slide, because a lot of you are asking what is distinguishing, how do kids get access to the HCBS services, I want to talk a little bit about our approach to eligibility. So the existing criteria right now in the 1915C waivers is a level of care criteria. And children have to meet the criteria and demonstrate that they're at risk of institutional placement in a variety of institutional settings, OMH settings, ICFMR, or skilled nursing facility or hospital. So right now, this is the criteria to access the HCBS array within the 1915C waivers. That will stay the same. And in addition, what we're proposing is a new criteria, which is level of need. And this would indicate that the child has needs that can't be met only by state plan services, but they really have not increased their level of need or level of needs to meet the level of care criteria. And how this will be determined is through the completion of a CANS New York, which is undergoing a revision. And these revisions, we hope, will make it more sensitive to all the targeted populations and delineates more levels or acuity thresholds for service determination. So currently, the existing waiver programs only serve kids that meet the level of care criteria, but with the proposed addition of the level of need, we'll be able to serve kids who have less intense needs, who are not at imminent risk of institutional placement, or those that might be ready to step down from higher end services, so say from the level of care intensity or from inpatient. Today, the array of HCBS benefits doesn't exist until a child has risen to the level of needing to enroll in a waiver. So when children are ready to leave a waiver, they're giving up all those supportive services which their family have found so helpful, and what may then only be available to them is case management, say through ICM, and clinic services and that sort of thing, but the family has really lost respite and skill building and some of the other supports. Children that are determined to meet the level of need criteria get to use the same HCBS service array, just at a lower level of intensity and frequency. And what we believe is this added flexibility that a combined array of benefits provides New York is that as the needs of children and families change over time, the intensity of the services can shift with them. There would be no longer a need to be qualifying for a waiver program to receive the services, and then in reverse, lose those benefits when you're ready to be discharged. The services and likely the providers who are serving the family could continue without interruption based on service plan goals. Next slide. There are broad steps that we're in the midst of discussing relative to eligibility and service access. Some of these steps will occur simultaneously in the process, or at least fairly similarly on similar paths. And the overall process and the who's and the what's is certainly not been finalized. So I'm kind of giving people a heads up that if you're asking who does the eligibility, who fills out the CANs, some of those questions have not been answered yet. And at the point that we're solid in those parts of the design, we'll certainly be announcing those. But there are 3 steps to accessing the HCBS services: eligibility evaluation, needs assessment, and plan of care development. We're exploring the completion of a brief CAN screen to establish the clinical and functional needs in addition to expediting access for HCBS services. So a brief CAN screen could be filled out and presumptive eligibility could be established for 30 days, while a full CANS gets completed and a more full service plan is developed. Within the eligibility evaluation, Medicaid eligibility will need to be verified. We will be retaining the family of one eligibility used today for those qualifying for the 1915C waivers. Often people refer to this as deeming, which is not the correct term, but that's what we all know it to be. In addition to broadening this ability to determine Medicaid eligibility as a family of one for a child who meets the level of need criteria. So no longer when a child's needs decrease and they don't meet the level of care criteria do they lose services or lose Medicaid eligibility. And just like today for kids that are eligible for the 1915C waivers as a family of one and obtain Medicaid eligibility, they are then eligible for any Medicaid service under the state plan. So thinking back to the 6 new services that I talked about, children would be eligible for those in addition to the intensity of level of need or level of care. The comprehensive CANs an algorithm would be completed by a care coordinator to verify the HCBS eligibility and inform the plan of care development. Once the plan of care is developed, the care coordinator will work with all team members to implement and follow up on the plan, including monitoring of service access. And finally, there would be periodic reassessment and plan of care review, just like it happens today in the waivers or in case management programs. So how do we envision actually providing these services? Go to the next slide. So let's talk about a young man and his story. Joshua is a 16-year-old male. He has 2 younger siblings. He's lived at home with his mother, who's divorced and works 2 jobs. As a young child, Josh was exposed to domestic violence in the home and sustained a head injury after being thrown against a wall during an incident in the home. His father left the home after this incident and has not had any ongoing contact with Joshua. Joshua has struggled with learning challenges affecting his speech and language since that incident and head injury. As a result of his early trauma and learning challenges, he struggles behaviorally, has problems academically at school, and socially with peers. Joshua and his mother have been referred many times to a mental health clinic, but with 2 jobs, she hasn't been able to make their appointments and really engage in that sort of treatment. Next slide. So let's look at what could happen today for Joshua in this example in our current system. So at 12, Joshua was placed on a PINS petition. At 13, he was expelled when a teacher found a knife in his backpack. As a result, he was sent to an alternate school setting. And there he did have a positive relationship with a counselor who was working to help him better manage his reactions to stress and was working to get him a mental health evaluation. Soon afterwards in this program, he got into a fight with a peer and was charged with aggravated assault and placed on probation. So you see in just the beginning of this case example, with a lack of engagement in clinic treatment or other supports and no other alternatives offered, Joshua continued to experience challenges that needed intervention as he hit adolescence. Next slide. At 15, he was arrested for larceny, and upon presenting to family court, the judge had really had enough and placed him in an OCFS facility for 1 year. At 16, when his caseworker at the facility was trying to make discharge arrangements for him, they found that returning home to his mother was not a viable option. She had a new boyfriend who was really not interested in having him return home. So he was then sent to live with his aunt in another state until he turned 18 and became an adult and probably moved out on his own. We can see that as a result of events in Joshua's life that interventions continued, and certainly all of these systems tried their best efforts at each juncture to provide him some supports and services, but the final result was that, ultimately he was placed out of his home with an aunt. Next slide. So let's think about how Joshua's life might have been a little different with some other options to offer. So the same young man, but let's look at his story in reference to some of the benefits that we're designing. Next slide. At a young age, he was identified through a screening, perhaps in with his pediatrician, as having severe learning challenges which affected his speech and language. He was referred to early intervention for an evaluation and was classified as being developmentally delayed and continued that classification under the Committee for Preschool Special Education. He was determined to be eligible for speech therapy and special education services. And as he entered elementary school, he was still struggling behaviorally and acted out in the home and school. And on one occasion, his acting out became so severe that his mother called mobile crisis. So came out to the home and assessed what was going on and determined that this family needed additional supports. He began receiving CPST, which again, hopefully you remember, is a new state plan service. And that service came to him and did on-site counseling with his family. And the treatment focus was on trigger identification, developing alternative coping mechanisms when he was frustrated, and tried to begin to work through some of his previous trauma and through that lens of what he had experienced as a very young child. By the age of 12, he continued to struggle academically, and he was diagnosed as meeting the criteria for serious emotional disturbance. Next slide. He was then referred to a health home to better coordinate the services that he needed and to help him with access. A CANS New York assessment was completed, and he was found to be eligible for the new HCBS services. His service plan was developed with his team, and it included such things as skill building, crisis respite, and family caregiver support services, in addition to the state plan service, CPST, which he was already getting, and speech therapy, which he was getting through the Committee on Special Ed. With these additional supports and services, he was really better able to cope with the stress and relating better to peers and his family. At age 14, he started receiving pre-vocational services, also a new HCBS benefit, and he decided to transfer to a Tech Valley school to further explore his interest in computers. His mother was very excited about the opportunities ahead of Joshua. So let's stop for a minute on the next slide and really think about these questions, and feel free to jot them down in the chat box. What were the major differences between both of these examples with the same young man? What prevented him from entering out-of-home placement in the second example? And how well does this potential path in the second example align with the goals of his family?
So please go ahead and use that chat box as you've been doing throughout the webinar, and submit your responses to some of the questions on the slides about the differences between the two case studies and the application of the new service array.
Well, it looks like people are being a little shy in digesting those two stories. So
we have a couple that just came in. There was a little bit of a delay, I think.
Okay.
So gave additional support in the home rather than placing him out of the home. The intervention CPST was particularly helpful. All the interventions were reactive in their approach in the first example, whereas in the second example they were proactive. The early intervention led to a more positive long-term prognosis. And I think there's a couple more. School programs were supported, in-home services were provided, including crisis services with follow-up. The connection to the mobile crisis unit was also particularly helpful.
Great, thanks for chiming in. That's exactly what I would have said. And so I think hopefully you can see through these examples, which I know are not perfect examples, and all of you clinicians out there could poke many holes in these examples to say, wow, that's not really how it could have happened, or something would have happened in the intervening, but it really was just to demonstrate that hopefully the new state plan services allow us to respond earlier because they're available for all children with Medicaid, and then those who increase in their needs could then access an array of HCBS services that can be delivered where the family lives, and really on their terms, similar to the 1915C waivers today.
Angela, a comment just came in that I think we can highlight that says, it seems that the services didn't change, but that the system around the family responded differently. Exactly.
So we wanted to keep the things that work well in the HCBS service array, and to add things that where we still had gaps, and to really think about a level of flexibility and intensity for the family that changes as children develop. So that's exactly right. So the next slide. So how can we be ready to provide these services? For those of you that have participated in previous webinars, who have caught up on maybe the children's MRT webinars, you've heard a lot of talk about these services and the benefit package and what will happen with eligibility, or what are we thinking about. But what is it that we need to do to get ready for these services? Go to the next slide. So there's many ways in which we can prepare staff. Certainly providing an overview of the services in the new array, sharing webinars such as this one that get recorded with staff, and then having some follow-up discussion in your agency about what would that mean differently in terms of how they view families, how they work with families, and how does that compare to how staff deliver services today. When often in settings we say, if only if we had service X, or if only I could take mental health counseling and deliver it to a child in their home, being assured that I'm going to engage with the mother who's there with younger children and not have the added burden of using public transportation and potentially never getting to the appointment. Also, helping staff move away from program models to services. This is really critical. I think as our system exists today, you meet certain eligibility, you can get into an RTF, community residence, a waiver, and what we're trying to do is have a common array that gets applied to children depending on their needs over time. And so how do we begin to have staff think about the activities they do with children in the context of program models that are really distinct services? In our waivers, that's a little easier to do. A staff person would know if they're going out and doing skill building versus care coordination. That looks different in terms of what your focus is with the family, but you need to really understand that you can do a variety of different activities. And what does it really mean to integrate care? So where in maybe more traditional case management programs, we have focused heavily on what is going on with a child's mental health needs. Are they accessing the therapeutic services that they need? And surrounding that, certainly we're addressing housing needs and other things that go on for families. But are we really connecting with a pediatrician to consult around what they see and what's going on? Do we consult when we make a referral with other providers that a family might get hooked up with? And so what this movement also focuses us on is a little bit better ways in which we can integrate care overall. Next slide. So not only does staff need to move their thinking from current programs to that of a flexible service array, they need to think about care and services that they're delivering in more concrete terms. Plans are likely to provide authorization for a set period of time, say 3 months, for a particular service. Clinically, the intervention should be moving towards goal achievement. So service plans and treatment plans must be goal-driven. Yes, we've all written service plans. They have goals, objectives, and tasks. But the degree to which those are realistic goals for families, they're measurable, you know when you've achieved them, is a whole other question. Treatment plans should be integrated into the plan of care. So if a child is receiving mental health counseling, if they're receiving family support, the care coordinator should have some sense of what's happening in the treatment or the service delivery of each of those components and how it relates to the overall care plan for that child. We should be able to track and measure progress on clearly written goals. That's what plans are going to be interested in. Okay, we've approved 3 months of respite. What's that difference? How did that assist that family in maybe attaining a goal or taking a next step in that child's recovery? Service authorization is really going to be for shorter periods of time. In the fee-for-service system, a lot of times when families are in some of these programs, they could potentially be with us forever. And there isn't an end date. And being within a managed care service delivery system really forces us to be much more focused, much more intentional in the activities that we're delivering and what is it that we are hoping to accomplish with a particular family. Next slide.
Great, so we wanted to take a second just to check in with everybody and do this poll. The poll should have popped up on the right-hand side, so if you can take a minute to answer. To what degree have you already started doing some of these steps to prepare staff, some of the recommendations that Angela just went over, or other things to prepare staff for the changes in services? Do you feel that you've already done a great deal of preparation? Have you only done some, very little, or you haven't even started yet? So I think this will also help us get a little bit of feedback as to where everybody is and how much support CTAC as a technical assistance center can look forward to providing for you as time moves forward. So again, the poll is on the right-hand side. You can click your response, hit submit, and momentarily we'll end the poll and the results will pop up. So Amanda, once we have enough responses, we can probably close that poll out and pop up the results. Thank you. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. I think it'll pop up momentarily. So have folks shown a great deal, done already a great deal of preparation, some very little, or you haven't had a chance to start yet? Thank you, Amanda. So it seems like, and Angela, please jump in, it seems like there's some preparation, a few of you have done quite a bit at this point, and there's a very few that haven't really started yet. So it seems like for those that replied, many of you have already really started thinking about this and really kind of started moving forward on some ways to prepare for the changes. Thank you, everybody. Angela, I'll pass it back to you.
Actually, I'm passing it to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So we wanted, so I think Angela has done a really wonderful job of giving an overview of the services in a little bit more detail than maybe you've already heard from folks. And please continue to submit those chat questions for us, as we'll probably have a little bit of time at the end to answer your questions. And also as a reminder that the slides and the recording from today will be posted on our ctacny.com website. We also will be gathering the questions that are asked and providing formal responses that OMH will review and provide, and will be posted on our ctacny.com website once those are ready to be posted. So please keep checking back on our website. But we wanted to take a minute, in addition to what Angela just covered around preparing the workforce, we wanted to take a minute and review some steps that we recommended during the last webinar. So this is the third in our series, and currently the last one in our series on Reimagining Children's Services, although I'm sure we'll be doing more things in the future that we will announce. The first webinar was Donna Bradbury really providing an overview of the services and the changes in the system. The second webinar was really focused on gearing up for change, so how an organization can, with all these changes in mind, really start thinking about preparing on a variety of different levels, from leadership on down. And then today we really focused on the services and the staffing. But we wanted to review quickly some of those recommendations from the last webinar because we think that they're particularly important to consider. And for those of you who haven't really yet started to do some of this work, we felt that this would be some good guidance. So we highly recommend that you review all the webinar recordings from this series. The URL link is at the bottom of that slide. You can also just go to ctacny.com, and the link is also for the Reimagining Children's Services series. You'll get that link right from the home page. You'll also have these slides, again, available to you on the website. So we highly recommend that you review those webinar recordings, the slides, share them with your staff. From the last webinar, we spent quite a bit of time really kind of talking through sort of using a quality improvement a focus to help staff really prepare and get ready and kind of mobilize those leaders in the organization, start thinking through what are some steps that we need to start doing now to be ready for the 2016 changes. We also created a tool that may be helpful for you, and for those of you, there's another side of CTAC that is called MCTAC, the Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, that really focuses on the specifics on supporting agencies and becoming ready for managed care changes, and that is very specific to managed care readiness. We also created a part 2 to that readiness assessment tool that is available for child-serving organizations that taps into some of these changes in services. So I'm going to go briefly into that, but you'll be able to access that tool, both the PDF file on our ctacny.com website, and you'll also be able to submit that to us through the website, through an online survey form. After also looking at that, mobilizing leaders as a leadership group, really coming together and developing that readiness assessment tool together, really kind of determining a set of action steps on high priority areas for improvement. So thinking through what are the main areas in which we need to work on based on the results of the readiness assessment, and what are some important steps to take forward to move forward. Focus on workforce development, really thinking through what is a good CQI process, a continuous quality improvement process that we can utilize, as well as a feedback loop in that process to ensure that all of the important stakeholders are involved, and really having a little bit of time now, not that much time, but a little bit of time to be able to kind of test and try out a couple different things and evaluate those results. Now the tool, for those of you who have participated in our MCTAC work, the tool is that same tool you already submitted as part of the readiness assessment, but what we did is we added an addendum specific to assessing child-serving service delivery models. So if you've already kind of done the part 1, you can also just submit the part 2 to us through our website, the ctacny.com website, and I'll give that URL again in just a minute. For those of you where this is completely new or you haven't had a chance to do the first part of the tool, you'll be able to do both as well by accessing through our website. And for those who aren't familiar about the managed care readiness side of the tool, these are the content areas that are covered that really kind of highlight some key core areas around each of these managed care priorities, things like contracting and billing and system requirements and credentialing, a variety of different things to keep in mind as an organization to prepare to be able to handle all the different changes that are going on. Part 2 is the addendum, which is a little bit of a different type of a survey that taps into questions around what are earlier identification and screening tools that you're currently using or thinking of using? What are treatment models and evidence-based practices that you're currently using? How are you currently really tracking outcomes through measures, through radiographic measures, through tracking? What is it that you're already doing to kind of tap into some of these issues that we know are going to be particularly important moving forward in the managed care system? And what is the agency assessment of the service array? So really kind of looking through which of the current, as Angela had said earlier, which of the services that she mentioned that will be an important part of the service array are you already providing? Are you collaborating with other organizations to provide? Is it something you should consider providing moving forward? How to complete the tool. So you can access the hard copy of the tool, the PDF files of both parts 1 and 2 from our website, and the URL is there at the bottom. Meet with key members of your leadership team, executive management team, and fill out a hard copy of the assessment together, because we really would like this to come as part of the leadership of an organization, not just one individual filling it out, but that it's really a concerted effort where everybody's kind of sitting down and really thinking through where the organization is in each of those areas and how best to move forward. And then once it's completed, what we're doing is asking, particularly the child-serving organizations, to be able to submit that tool through our online, through this online mechanism that we have, that's also accessible on that same page where you'll get the hard copy, and to submit that by January 30th if at all possible. Each agency will also receive an individualized report of those responses soon after. So what we'll be able to do is kind of be able to evaluate the assessment tool for you and be able to provide an individualized report per agency on each of those core areas under both managed care readiness as well as the children's addendum. What I do want to highlight here is that individual agency information will be kept confidential. We will not be sharing the individual agency information with others or with OMH. What we'll be providing is only aggregate information. So please feel safe and secure in providing that information for us. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me directly with any concerns around that as well. For those of you who are not familiar with MCTAC, we do have some additional resources around preparing for managed care through that. For example, if you need some assistance in completing the first part of the tool, there's around general managed care readiness. We have a webinar that's also a link from that same page that you'll go to capture the tool. So right there, you'll be able to access that webinar. You'll also be able to go to mctac.org for all the different things that we're doing to help agencies prepare for managed care. So there's a number of different events and trainings and webinars and calls and things that are happening right now as we move forward in supporting folks in the adult system that really can expand to the children's system as well. So we highly, highly recommend that you check out mctac.org as well as go to the Children's Reimagining Services webpage on our website. Again, the URL ctacny.com and mctac.org. We also expect that as we move forward, depending on the feedback from these webinars, the feedback that we're getting through doing all the variety of different MCTAC work, that we'll be able to kind of work together to continue to build out any additional support and technical assistance for sites specific to the child-serving agencies as the year moves forward. I also just wanted to highlight that at the end of this webinar, you're going to get a feedback survey that's going to automatically pop up. And there is an open kind of comment section at the bottom. I ask that if you can, to please submit kind of your feedback, not only around the webinars, but really also about what are some additional resources, training, support, what are some additional things that you think you could use to help support you in moving forward and preparing for these changes specific to the child-serving agencies. Okay. So we have a few minutes. We'd like to be able to take some of your questions. Angela is willing to answer some of those questions as best as she can. I do want to highlight that what we're doing during the webinar is able to provide you with preliminary responses to your questions. What we're going to do is we're going to compile the questions, both the ones that were answered and the ones that weren't answered, and be able to kind of formally respond to them, put them together after OMH has a little bit of closer review, as we know that there's some questions that, OMH can answer. There's some questions they can't quite answer yet because it's still being developed, but we'll do our best to try to get some responses for you and then be able to post them on that same webpage resource where you're going to access all the Children's Reimagining Services material. So I just wanted to highlight that again. And in case anybody asks, the webinar slides for all 3 webinars and the recording are also available on that Reimagining Children's Services webpage resource through our ctacny.com webpage. So thank you for sticking around and listening to us kind of share our different resources. We do have some time, and Angela, if you're ready, we have a number of questions that have come in, if you don't mind answering some of those at this time, or is there anything else you would like to add?
No, while you were talking, I was perusing through the great questions that people have submitted, and so I'll cover probably a good handful of them. So one of the questions is, could I give an example of something that could be billed in the future that is not currently able to be billed, some specific service? So right now, youth peer support is not a coverable service under Medicaid. That's one. Any evidence-based practices that a provider gets designated to provide would be an avenue that would be new under this model. Crisis intervention would be new in terms of being able to be billed under Medicaid. Okay, what about kids that do not have Medicaid? So I just want to repeat, right now in the 1915C waivers, if a child meets the diagnosis and functional limitations criteria consistent with a level of care, so they're at risk for institutional placement, and they would not normally be eligible for Medicaid, Medicaid and the local district would look at that child's resources as a family of one and disregard their parents' income. So in many cases, many of those children become eligible for Medicaid on their own as a family of one, a case by themselves. And then they can access the HCBS services and any state plan, any other Medicaid services that they might need. We will follow the same with level of care, kids that meet level of care criteria in the future, and we hope to add for those kids that meet the level of need criteria that they too could be determined Medicaid eligible as a family of one. Okay, with the changes coming to Medicaid managed care, will we still be able to bill for children directly to Medicaid, or will we have to bill to the managed care companies? Great question. When we transition to managed care, this is a very simplified explanation, is that the managed care company will receive a monthly capitated rate for each of their members. Included in that capitation rate will be all the service dollars calculated on average for a child who needs physical health, mental health services, whatever they need. And within that monthly payment, the managed care plans need to have available a network of providers that can deliver all the state plan services, so the ones that are in now, the fee-for-service services that will transition, and the new state plan services, and the new HCBS services. They'll have to have an array of providers that can provide those, and under contract with them, and then the managed care companies will pay those providers. So there will be a direct contractual relationship between providers and managed care plans. No longer will you bill Medicaid for children that are in Medicaid managed care. Agencies may still have children that are in fee-for-service Medicaid, and I would anticipate that that billing mechanism will continue to be straight to the state. Another question, several questions around case management. So where does case management fit in the HCBS plan? How do the existing ICM programs fall into this spectrum? What's the caseload ratio per intensive case manager or supportive case manager? Great questions. One of the things we didn't spend any time on in this webinar, because we really wanted to focus on the new services, was the rollout of health homes for children, which will begin in October of this year. So existing OMH, ICM, SCM, and BCM programs will convert to health home care coordination. So all of those staff will no longer be called intensive case managers, they will be care coordinators, and they will deliver services under the health home rules and guidelines, which providers, as they get designated and engaged downstream providers, will learn more about. And so the existing rules and regulations associated with ICM and SCM will essentially go away. So the number of contacts to get paid will change. The providers will be paid by the health homes that they have contractual relationships with. And so that's what will happen with ICM. If you look in the health home application for children, there is a section that refers to what are the anticipated caseload ratios, and they range from 12 to 40, depending on the acuity level of the child. The other question related to then how does case management fit into the HCBS plan? So you'll see in the HCBS service array that there is HCBS care coordination. We anticipate that the majority of kids that will be eligible for the HCBS services will also meet the criteria for enrolling in a health home, and that's where their care coordination will exist. There will be some kids, however, who don't meet all the criteria for health home and still need a level of care coordination in the community, and that really could be delivered in a variety of different ways, which again, the plans will engage with a network of providers to provide the HCBS care coordination. And those of you that are waiver providers have been participating, hopefully, in monthly webinars, and I think there's one coming up this week, next week, Thursday, tomorrow, to keep you updated on the changes that are happening with OMH's HCBS waiver. And certainly, as we anticipate the care coordination service under the waiver will transition to health homes when the managed care transition occurs. Another question was about the projection of eligible children for the HCBS services and whether the state will share that once we have figured that out. So the state agencies right now are engaging in an exercise, as I said, to revise the CANs and come up with an algorithm that is sensitive to all the populations and then buckets children into level of need, level of care, low acuity levels. And from that, we're really determining then what are the characteristics of those groups of children and how many we think across all the populations of Medicaid-eligible children might they be eligible for the HCBS services and or the new state plan services. As the projections of those groups of children continue and as we finalize those numbers, we certainly will be sharing that information you know, as we get to that point. That projection will certainly help us inform the rate methodology and where we go in terms of payment for individual services. There was a question about, and I'm not finding it right now, about it's hard, just a comment that it's really hard to do planning for the future without knowing how much you will be paid. A decision that's been made in the design, similar to the adult managed care design with the HARPs and the new HCBS services, is that managed care plans will receive a list of designated providers from the state agencies, and those will be the providers that have had experience or would demonstrate experience to deliver the new services. And those would be the providers that the plans could begin to contract with, and you know, there certainly could be others that aren't at this point under contract with a state agency. We anticipate that there will be government rates and a fee schedule that is developed for each of the services, and the plans will be required for the first 2 years not only to contract with existing providers of OMH, OASAS, and OCFS, and DOH, but will be required to be paying very specific rates. And it won't be until the 3rd year where a plan would be negotiating with an individual provider on the rate. So it levels the playing field for everyone to be able to get a contract with a plan and then know what you're being paid. So, for example, if you're skill builder that's part of a waiver, there's been a rate associated with that for both OCFS and OMH, and so we will take a look at those rates and come up with one rate for anyone delivering skill building services. So I would expect, you know, it's going to be somewhat in the range of what people are paid today. We do know that there are some services where the rates today are inadequate. Family peer support is one of those that have been communicated to the state within the waiver that the rate of payment is very low. So as we construct rates, certainly there will be opportunity to look at current rates and that sort of thing. We've got a few more minutes, but here's a question. Can agencies that do not currently provide Medicaid services to children provide the new services? If so, what's the process to apply? Too early for us to know. We would imagine, I mean, if you take, for example, family peer support, with the exception of agencies that are waiver subcontract agencies, family support agencies do not have the ability to bill for Medicaid. Their services are supported by state funding. So they will become Medicaid providers, and there will be a process in which we will do that. And as we move along, we'll certainly be informing people of that process. And can providers of care management also provide the new array of services under Medicaid? And how does conflict-free case management work in reference to providing these services? Huge question. There is a lot of dialogue happening right now between the state and CMS with regard to conflict-free in a number of different arenas and processes and projects. I think as the months move on, we will get a whole lot more clarity around that, and the degree to which, and for those of you that are familiar with conflict-free, the degree to which separation by lines of supervision or administrative firewalls are effective or enough for CMS in the models that we're designing. But it's really very early in the process for us to give a definitive answer on some of that. I think those are probably some of the highlights of a good smattering of questions that people have given. But again, as we keep moving ahead in the design, if you haven't signed up for the Children's Managed Care Listserv, do so. We do post the MRT, Children's MRT meetings and slides, and so you can keep up as the design changes. At different junctures, I would anticipate we're going to reach out to stakeholders for feedback. One clear area is in the CANS implementation. We will go through a testing and piloting phase. So some of you on this call will most certainly hear from us to assist in that.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Angela. So we're about at time right now. I just wanted to give a little bit more information. Here are some resources. So Angela was mentioning the MRT website. There's also the Health Homes website, as well as the Children's Resources and Medicaid Managed Care Listserv to get some up-to-date information. So again, these slides and the webinar recording will be posted on our ctacny.com website under the Reimagining Children's Services link. So please make sure to check that. And the recording for today may take a day or two to get posted, but the slides can be posted later today. This is our email, so this is Angela Heller's email for any questions specific to the Children's Managed Care design. Any questions specific to CTAC can come to me, lydia.franco@nyu.edu. And just as a reminder, we will be gathering, again, the questions from today's webinar, try to get some formal responses to them and post them on that Reimagining Children's webpage on our ctacny.com website. So again, thank you everybody for participating in today's webinar. Thank you so much, Angela, for having a wonderful presence on our webinar and for being so helpful for folks. I do want to just thank everybody for your patience during the technical difficulties, and please just have a wonderful day. Thank you.
There we go.